Good morning. My name is Olivia, and I'm a senior here at Elon. I spent a good amount of time thinking about the theme for this year's Newman Lumen, What Now? Stories of Change and Resilience. After some consideration, I've decided to focus specifically on the word resilience. I've noticed that we tend to admire resilience greatly, and we should. Overcoming major obstacles is an impressive accomplishment, and it's inspiring. As a person who has had her fair share of challenges to overcome, I always admire those who overcome difficulties and continue to live their lives. But sometimes I wonder if our conception of resilience is missing something. When I was in high school, I had a very different idea of what resilience is than I do now. I was sure that resilience meant that I needed to suck it up, push down my feelings, and ignore my most basic physical and mental needs so that I could be an accomplished person and help others. Because of this, my high school experience was incredibly stressful, and I obsessed over my fear of failure. Junior year was particularly difficult for me, especially as I was getting ready for summer. I was studying for regular exams and AP exams, organizing the school service project, playing one of the main roles in the end-of-year play, working as a swim coach, and getting my lifeguard certification. On top of all of this, I was struggling with PTSD that resulted from a car accident that I had been in a few months earlier. As a 17-year-old, this was far too much, and I think I knew it. I knew that I wasn't okay, but I refused to recognize it, and I refused to address it. I would push through this, I thought, and I would be stronger in the end. But I was anxious all of the time. There was this heavy feeling that I was constantly carrying around in my chest. I worried and obsessed about every possible thing that I could screw up. It was like a constant state of panic. I was particularly worried about the lifeguard physical pretest, where you have to swim to the other end of the pool, dive down and retrieve a 10-pound brick, and swim back with it. The first time I had tried it, a few weeks before the class started, I had dropped the brick halfway back. I had been stressing about it for weeks and practiced constantly because I was terrified of losing my spot as a lifeguard, which had already been promised to me if I could pass the course. Finally, after weeks of little to no sleep and constant stress, I did the physical pretest for the lifeguarding course perfectly. I had finished the test, faster than anyone else actually, and gone back into the locker room to change. I was relieved, but I was still stressing out because I knew that I was going to have to pass the final test, and I was scared that I wouldn't be able to do it. I also started thinking about my AP exam a couple of days later and all of the other things that I needed to finish before the year ended. When I was reaching for the door, I guess my brain and my body decided that they had had enough, and I had a sleep-deprived and stress-induced seizure. I wasn't injured, and I didn't experience any brain damage, but it was terrifying. When they mentioned in the ER that seizures could be stress-induced, part of me had to admit that it was certainly a possibility. I remembered how once I woke up from the seizure, I was lying on the floor and hadn't realized what had happened, but I noticed that the nervous feeling that had been in my chest for weeks was actually gone. It was as if my brain had worked out all of this anxiety and stress, and once it was gone, I realized how much I'd actually been struggling in the past months. But I honestly wanted to be okay. This was an obstacle, a scary one, but I was convinced that I had to push through it. I was a strong person, and I would just force myself to get over it. I was so convinced that I could work through it that I made myself take my AP exam 2 days after the seizure. I have to be honest, it didn't go well. In my experience, seizures take everything out of you and can take some time to recover from. I filled in the bubbles, wrote something for the essay portion, and then fell asleep for the rest of the exam period. I got a 2, which was pretty disappointing. And if I had waited to take it, I probably would have done much better, but I couldn't admit to myself that taking it so soon was a bad idea. At this point, I didn't really care about my health. I wasn't as upset about having a seizure as I was about the fact that, since I had had a seizure, I couldn't be within 5 feet of a swimming pool. This was catastrophic to me, since I had already acquired 3 jobs that summer: a swim coach, a swim instructor, and a lifeguard. All of that time interviewing and all of that time planning went down the drain, and I was devastated. In the end, my boss did let me continue being a swim coach, provided that I coach from the side and stay at least 5 feet away from the pool. I tried to function as normally as possible that summer, but I still struggled. I was anxious all of the time because I had lost most of my income for the summer. I felt guilty for just sitting around when I wasn't at practice, and I was constantly thinking about the seizure and what it could mean. I made myself sick thinking about the MRI that was scheduled for a few weeks later, playing all of the worst-case scenarios over and over again in my head. I felt guilty for putting my family through such a scary situation, especially my stepsister who had watched the whole thing. But I didn't tell anyone, and I pretended that I was fine. I wanted people to think that I was strong enough to overcome anything. I took pride in it. When I look back on this time now, I know that I should have handled things differently. I wish that I had listened to my body and my brain and relaxed a little bit. I wish I had focused on my well-being rather than forcing myself to be okay, and I wish I admitted that I wasn't okay. I wish I had asked someone for help instead of pretending that I was capable of overcoming this on my own. I wish I had taken that time in my life to take care of myself. I also wish that I had listened to the 5-foot rule, because a few weeks into swim season, I had another seizure and fell into the deep end of the pool while I was coaching. Luckily, my coworker was in the water in front of me holding a lifeguard tube that I had actually just passed to her, and she caught me before my head went under, which, when I think about it now, was kind of miraculous. I didn't really think it was at the time, though. At the time, I was just really, really angry. But I finally had to say it. I finally had to give in. I wasn't okay, and I admitted it to myself and started to work on making myself better. That was the last seizure that I ever had. I made some changes in how I handled myself. I saw a therapist, and I tried really hard to get 8 hours of sleep every night. I dropped a couple of my extracurriculars and attempted to take everything in my life a little bit less seriously. Not to say that I changed my lifestyle completely, but things were better. Even when I came to college, I limited myself to classes, having a job, and one student organization. Even at this point, though, I still didn't truly understand what resilience was and what it entailed. I did start to value self-care, though, and that made a huge difference in my life. Last year, I had an amazing summer working with disadvantaged youth in Cincinnati. I lived in the neighborhood and worked every day building up their confidence and helping them navigate the challenges that they had faced, and it was amazing. But it was also really difficult, and it could be really sad. Interacting with kids who didn't have enough to eat and didn't get much attention was heartbreaking sometimes. Working with these kids, many of whom had severe behavior issues, required a lot of energy and compassion. Because I lived in the neighborhood in a 1-bedroom apartment with 3 other coworkers, it was almost impossible to take a break. It felt like I was constantly working, and I actually almost had a complete breakdown 2 weeks in. I'd been running myself ragged, hardly sleeping, and constantly skipping meals. I had to make a change and start taking care of myself and making myself a priority. When I did, I felt exponentially better and I performed my job better. I was able to keep up with the kids and provide them with a positive, upbeat atmosphere that they thrived in. I got to a point where I could genuinely enjoy and value the challenges that were put in front of me. Taking care of myself didn't make my work less challenging, but it made me strong enough to conquer those challenges. And I was still proud of myself because I had made a difference and I performed one of the most challenging jobs that I ever had. That summer, I finally figured it out. I finally understood what resilience should entail for me. For me, being resilient requires self-care. When I encounter difficult situations, I might have to struggle, but I don't have to stop caring about myself. I finally realized that everyone is deserving of well-being, always. As college students, I think we often forget about our personal well-being. College is so overwhelming. Trying to have the perfect grades while participating in multiple organizations, while working, while maintaining a social life is challenging. And I've come across many students who are struggling with mental and physical illness, family problems, and other challenges. I've come to a point in my life where I honestly hope that these students know that taking care of themselves does not make their resilience less valuable, but it might give them the strength to overcome the challenges in their lives. Maintaining our well-being, admitting that we're having a hard time, doesn't make overcoming the challenge any less commendable, because it's still a challenge. I'm not saying that I'm the expert on self-care. I often find myself getting overwhelmed and ignoring my own needs, but I've managed to learn from my mistakes, and I know now that my well-being is valuable and that taking care of myself is the key to being able to help others. I've gotten to a point in my life where I can take on more daunting challenges while also knowing that it's okay for me to take time for myself. I understand now that it's not weak to ask for help. According to the American Psychological Association, taking care of yourself helps to keep your mind and body primed to deal with situations that require resilience. I see self-care as a tool that can be used to overcome some of the most difficult challenges in our lives. And I think we should continue to admire resilience, but I hope that we can all remember to take care of ourselves as we overcome the challenges ahead of us. Thank you.